Dagor Dagorath, The Last Tale of Arda. 3. Of the Shadow Rekindled and the Seeds of Dominion. From the unquiet hearts of men, a murmur gathered and drifted eastward on a slow wind. The long wandering. Though the tales say that the chief servant of the Shadow had been cast down at the end of the third age of Middle-earth, his bodily form stripped from him with the ruin of his ring, he was not extinguished. For being of the Ainur, his spirit did not pass from the world until the world itself be remade. Yet the ruin he had wrought upon himself was grievous. His will, once dreadful to endure, lay dispersed and diminished, unable to gather solid shape or voice. Thus he endured as a presence without name or form, bound to the world he had failed to control utterly, remaining burdened by memories he could not fully recall or place. Nor can it be said with certainty when first he began again to gather himself, for to such a houseless spirit, years and centuries were alike, and the moment of returning purpose was hidden even from him. Some reckon it early, others late, yet the truth is veiled, and the beginnings of his strength passed unseen. But long indeed were the years of his wanderings on earth, measured by the slow erosion of meaning and purpose. He passed over abandoned fields where rusted helms lay half buried, through broken towers where ivy claimed the stones, and along dry riverbeds that had once run red with war, yet none remembered why. He also perceived time as a weight pressing upon his thought, without pause or measure. Seasons passed above unnoticed, with centuries falling together like drifting dust upon forgotten stone, until the ordering of past and present grew thin. Moments arose when he could not discern whether the War of the Ring lay ages behind or had only just ended. Memory had begun to fray. In that houseless state, he feared fading more than his destruction. He feared his substance, his essence, his malice dissipating like breath on cold air. Often he would be drawn to and cling to places of ruin or old slaughter, where the wounds of Arda had not yet healed. He would draw what little meaning and strength he could from lingering fear and the sorrow of the landscape. Still, these scars soften with time, as grass would grow over graves once honoured, with men forgetting the names of their own dead. In this, he perceived a terror greater than defeat, the slow unmaking of relevance. Most grievous to him was the silence of the powers of the West. Once thought to have passed beyond their care for the world, he now understood his folly and lack of understanding. He awaited at every turning of his thought their gaze and their judgment, a summons he would be powerless to repel. With each tremor of the earth, each storm upon the air, his dread was stirred at the thought of Manwë or Mandos bending their will to the east, to him. But no such reckoning came. This absence of judgment gnawed at him more cruelly than chains. A sentence might have ended his torment, but uncertainty endured. In his wandering he continued to seek remnants of the dominion he once held. At last, being drawn to deep places where the last of the fallen creatures lingered in misery, the orcs, a people long hunted, once numerous, now scattered, yet they also endured. They skulked in broken tunnels and forgotten pits, some feral, and all mistrustful. Few tales passed through their generations of banners they had once marched under as a plague across the land, in immeasurable numbers. Their speech was coarse and fragmentary, loyalties were splintered, and they fought each other as often as they were pursued by the race of men in the world above. When at last he came among them, he could not approach in splendour or command, or even as a phantom. Rather, he lingered first at the edges of their camps, a whisper at the margin of sight, letting dread grow before his coming could be understood. He passed among them like a chill through marrow, stirring in many an ancestral terror and dim recollection of obedience. At this thought, some cast themselves into pits and crevices, shrieking, others gnawed and clawed at the stone, or fled without sense. For to most of that broken race, even the rumour of an unseen master was enough to unmake them. Yet not all were so easily bowed. Among the greater tribes were chieftains old in cruelty and stubborn pride, creatures who had survived many hunts, bearing trophies of men and dwarves slain, owing allegiance to none but their own strength. These felt his will pressing upon them like a distant storm, and straightened beneath it. They spat into the dark and mocked the unseen presence, calling it wind, memory, a ghost of the dead. One laughed aloud and bade the others keep their blades, saying that no shadow would rule him while he drew breath. Then the servant gathered the power he had possessed, and sought to daunt them. The air grew heavy, torches flickered, and that distant storm became immediate and descended upon the camp. Lesser orcs whimpered and crawled on their bellies, yet the great chieftains only staggered and gritted their teeth, forcing themselves upright. Though fear gnawed at them, they would not kneel. They cursed him openly, and some turned their backs in deliberate scorn. In that moment he felt how far he had fallen. For once, whole hosts would have broken at the mere whisper of his thought. Anger flared within him like a sudden fire, and the ground itself seemed to tremble. Stones cracked and sparks leapt from the walls, and for a heartbeat the camp fell silent. The mockers ceased their laughter and lowered their eyes in weary stillness. Yet even then they did not yield. When the pressure lifted, they rose again, muttering and drifting away into the tunnels, refusing any service. Thus his dominion proved thin as smoke, able to frighten, not command. From these encounters came to him the bitter taste of weakness. He could sow dread and scatter the weak, yet the proud defied him. In their brokenness, he beheld the mirror of his own possible end and departed, carrying with him loathing and desire. The stirring of the greater will. As years passed, he continued to move from the cold wastes of the north to the burning sands of the south, unseen and bound to the substance of Middle-earth. He beheld the brief ascendancy of new realms among men, and their seemingly inevitable decline through pride and war. Pretenders crowned themselves and were later cast down. Cities rose upon ancient battlefields, and in time sank again into their own dust. Through all these changes, he drifted as an unseen malice without instrument, unable to intervene or to turn events aside. From this grew in him a colder cruelty and a patience deeper than he had known at the height of his dominion. It was bitterness without relief. Often he marked how swiftly the works of the children perished, and he took a grim solace in their frailty, counting each fall as proof that the world still required a master's hand. There were nights when he hovered above burning towers or broken gates, and watched the last defence of kings whose names are now lost. He heard the clash of steel and the weeping of the defeated, only enduring and observing, storing each memory like a miser of sorrow. Thus by witness his malice deepened. In time, a change came upon his thoughts, a different tremor within the earth, subtle at first, like distant thunder beyond the hearing of men. The ancient discord that his master had woven into the fabric of the world began to stir, answering the fears and cruelties of those who now held dominion. From the unquiet hearts of men, a murmur gathered and drifted eastward on a slow wind. When it reached him, he felt again an echo of the power he once bore, and with it the memory of a will greater than his own. He recoiled at first, for an old dread awakened within him. For a fleeting moment he deemed that the One had turned his thought upon him, and a judgment long deferred had come at last. Never before had he felt such a pressure upon his mind. It was vast and unbidden. He sought concealment, clinging to stone and darkness, sinking into the roots of the world, as though the earth might shield him. Yet the presence did not strike as lightning, nor burn as righteous fire. It endured, patient and enclosing, like a poison spreading beneath stone, unseen and unyielding. Its touch carried pride and hunger, command and no mercy. Slowly an understanding dawned on him. This was no judgment of the One, nor the distant regard of the Valar. It bore the temper of possession and the memory of ancient dominion. In that cold lightness, he recognized the source, and fear gave way to recognition. Thus he perceived that the will seeking him was of his ancient master, the shadow he had once served, the shadow he served, and the one he would always serve, Melkor. The Renewal of Service. A new fear reached him, coupled with a great longing. The truth of his own identity returned to him, and he saw with bitter clarity what others had once felt beneath his own gaze at the height of his splendour. The memory of subjugation returned, along with the old desire to belong to a greater design and to help shape it. Though time had passed since he felt this will, the bond was not severed. Driven by this pressure, he wandered again without rest. Passing through the minds of beast and man like a sickness, he began to take on fleeting guises: a whispering counsellor, a veiled wanderer, a dark figure glimpsed at the edge of sight. Yet these shapes would not hold. A face would blur like smoke upon water, hands would thin to shadow, voices would fail mid-word. What once he had worn at will now slipped from him like ill-fitting garments. Thus his attempts to take shape became a mockery of his former mastery, and each brief embodiment was a reminder of it. Still, beneath this frailty, he felt something stirring, a slow coiling of strength, as if the world itself remembered him. Long before the birth of the king who would later dream of him, he had already turned his thoughts to the east, laying quiet foundations among distant tribes and secret brotherhoods, so that when at last his shape returned, much had already been prepared. He had relearned the craft of domination, studying the workings of fear and belief anew, the subtle ways by which thought can turn towards obedience. With dreadful ease, he fell back into old arts. At last, he was drawn again to a hidden place, and what follows can only be gathered from dread memory and from the long shadows it cast upon the world. Before any word was spoken, time itself seemed to falter. Moments no longer followed one another in their set order, and the measure of what was before and after lost meaning. He became aware that the world was being regarded as a whole, with no division or sequence. The presence of his old master did not announce itself. It was felt as the settling of some greater law, one older than form and deeper than substance. Fire dimmed where it burned, and winds faltered in lands unseen. The trickling of water on stone subsided, and all was silent. A will that had once attempted to contend with the one in the music of the Ainur, bending the harmony of creation toward discord, now encompassed all. A voice within declared, "Long hast thou wandered, child of Aule." The title fell upon him like iron. The voice continued, "Thy craft endures, thy pride endures, yet thou hast hidden from thyself. Look upon what thou hast become." Suddenly the servant stood revealed to himself. All presence of mastery thinned and fell away. He perceived with a cold and dreadful lucidity that his dominion, so carefully rebuilt through long ages, was narrow. Kingdoms which had seemed to him enduring works appeared as transient instruments, set in motion and laid aside. There stirred within him the memory of an older self, long buried beneath titles and fear. The names given to him by others fell away like dust, and he remembered at last the first name he had borne in the light of the world, before ruin: Mairon. Named again in his own thought, he gathered what strength he could, shaping his thought into firmness as once he had shaped both metal and flame. His pride had not failed him. Mairon neither abased himself nor forgot what he believed he had achieved. He had hidden from no truth, and as the world had lain broken with realms rotted and kings warring like beasts, he had set his hand to what remained, providing order. He had ruled where no one else had endured, and that memory of sovereignty burned within him. He had healed what Melkor had broken. Melkor spoke rarely, and when he did, the words carried no heat of passion, for they required none. Anger was not felt in his words, as anger was for equals, and Mairon felt it plain that he was no equal. "Healed," said Melkor, and memory pierced Myron. Rings, towers, engines, wills chained to his own, and the pressure about him deepened. "Order," said Melkor. And Myron saw flashes of war, of elves, men and orcs scattered across battlefields, in marshes long forgotten, and of bones turning to dust and sand, and the fall of a once impenetrable fortress before the greater will claimed his attention once again. Myron answered in pride, carefully ordered, his fear held in check. He spoke of the world as he found it, never denying his own rule. He named himself, with guarded confidence, as a king of the earth. He spoke of men, how they had grown in cunning and might since the elder days, stronger in number, bolder in will, less bound by counsels of the West. Things had changed, and the world no longer turned upon elves and the Valar alone. Melkor let the claim pass without response. Instead, he spoke of the world, of how it would yet be shaped according to his desire. He named Myron's works as movements within a deeper design, fashioned without the knowledge of the hand that guided them. He spoke with full confidence, as though he knew all that Myron had wrought when he had been unjustly imprisoned beyond the world. Yet in this there was falsehood, though no ear could discern it. His own pride allowed no admission of ignorance, and his mastery of deceit was complete. To Myron there came a bitter understanding. He saw the deeper falsehood at work, as he was also a lord of lies. Melkor spoke as though knowledge itself bent to his claim, as though belief, once asserted with sufficient will, hardened into truth. In this lay the greater terror than ignorance, for if Melkor believed himself author of all that had been done, then in his mind it was already so, and the world would in time be forced to conform to that belief. He saw that his master claimed authorship of deeds he had not and could not have witnessed, knowing the claim to be untrue. He understood that truth carried no weight here. Melkor required only belief, and the power to enforce it. In this deep place, far from the eyes of the world, Myron suddenly felt naked and revealed. And when Melkor next spoke, his words turned to preparation. His voice entered like a slow tide, deliberate, assured. And for a brief moment, Myron sensed beneath the certainty a need disguised as command. Melkor spoke of concealment as a deliberate measure. The West lingered in habits grown dull through peace, and the Valar sat distant from the world. Their watch stretched thin by the passing of long years. There was no need to rouse them before the appointed hour. Melkor spoke aloud. Let them remain in their long watch, measuring shadows that no longer answer them. His tone allowed no hint of doubt, though Myron sensed care beneath the words, perhaps hidden fear. The world was to be shaped first. Let belief, obedience, and strength be gathered until revelation was an inevitability. Melkor then spoke of others who laboured within the world, powers uncounted, shapes forgotten, wills that had not passed from Arda. He named none openly, yet Myron's thoughts went swiftly to the east. He recalled rumours and broken tongues, wanderers from the great sea who had long ago come upon distant peoples, teaching lore half-remembered, and rites bent from older truths. Of the spirits of shadow and flame fleeing the ruin of the ancient cataclysm and hiding in deep places. Of the winged serpents spoken of in fireside fear, said to sleep beneath Ashen Mountain, timeless. Myron was one among others, neither solitary nor unique. He was one instrument, a chosen one, yet replaceable. This knowledge stung more deeply than command, yet Myron did not yield it groundlessly. He accepted the charge laid upon him through his own calculation. If he were an instrument, then he would be necessary. If the world was to be reshaped, his hand would be placed upon the design and the work. The bond was thus renewed without oath or ceremony, and Melkor's presence withdrew. What light there was returned, and all that was still moved again. The pressure lessened, yet the bond lay heavier than before, a chain newly set about the spirit of Myron. In the silence that followed, Myron measured the weight of what had passed. He knew that when Melkor walked again within the world, his own dominion would be rendered small, he trusted patience and time, which had undone masters greater than kings. And when the presence withdrew, it had left its mark. Something remained. Myron perceived it dimly at first, a deepening of the accord between his will and the broken places of the world, where before he had bent minds through labour and patience, now fracture itself answered his call. Ruin gathered more readily, and fear travelled farther. The scattered drew together as though some ancient summons had been renewed. He knew then that this strength was not his by right, nor born of his own craft alone. It was bound to another's need, to an hour not yet come. And when Myron felt it was time to walk within the world again, as strength gathered to him once more, his form, long and unstable, began to hold. Pain accompanied its return, for the discord within him was great, and the marks of former ruin lay plain upon his flesh. In this diminished form he was terrible still, and his presence could bend mortal thought. He would not suffer that countenance to be seen. The scars of his defeat remained, flesh marred like cooled slag, and hands blackened and maimed. Therefore he devised a concealment of his own design, and from hoarded metal and forgotten treasuries, he wrought a mask of mithril, harder than steel, fairer than silver, smooth and expressionless, wrought without mercy or adornment, so that no eye might read thought nor weakness. Thus he returned to the world as a priest, a counsellor, and a lord. Men beheld no scars of defeat, only a deathless visage and a voice of authority, a form appearing in dreams, in visions, standing above kneeling multitudes of firelit halls and temples, a silent witness to the dominion yet to come. The Reshaping of Dominion. In this guise, Myron had removed himself from dark places of the world, a seed of ruin. Wherever craft was prized above wisdom, he lingered in the shadows. Wherever engines were raised and fire bent to cruel purpose, he whispered wicked counsel. Thus his influence grew in slow corruption, spreading like rot in fair timber, so that when his name was at last spoken openly, much of his work was done. He taught the binding of will to substance, wedding metal and malice, revering mastery as the highest of laws. Cults would arise around him, drawn by the fear and promise of knowledge, unrestrained. As he rose in power, grasses withered beneath his feet, birds fled and wolves hid trembling until commanded to return. Men would whisper of haunted woods and dark shapes glimpsed at dusk. Fear continued to spread, and with that fear, strength grew within him, dread being the substance from which his dominion was wrought. At last, he returned to the orcs that had mocked him so openly, having once passed through their dreams and, souring their tempers, setting brother against brother. When he arrived in solid shape, their fear had been prepared. He approached as their lord manifest, approaching them beneath forgotten mountains clothed in fear and command, and those who dismissed him now bowed before him, or were broken utterly and slain by those who obeyed. Chieftains who had resisted were forced down before their followers, and tribes were bound together by terror and lies. And one he lifted bodily and dashed against stone for all to see. Another he left alive but devoid of purpose and will, a mute thing that crawled around his feet. Seeing this, the rest bent the knee without command, and old war cries were replaced with silence. Obedience returned to them, and he drew it for labour, secrecy, and survival. He did not yet reveal himself as a lord to men. Instead, he continued in the east to lands long faithful and secret to the memory of the shadow, and found willing servants who bowed before him. This labour had begun generations earlier, in years forgotten by Gondor and Rohan, and before Arvalon of the West was born, for he had long since planted teachers, altars, storehouses, gathering strength with a patience learned in defeat. Through the years he continued to gather his strength, delaying the full revelation of his return and purpose. His heart was not at ease. Though he delighted again in power, he perceived with a cold clarity that his master's triumph would leave little place for any rival will. In older days he had called himself shaper and healer of the world, imagining dominion as order. Now in younger days he understood that the greater victory he served would unmake even the realms he meant to rule. Every gain was shadowed by loss. He wove designs of his own, strengthening hidden fastnesses and secret treasuries, measuring how he might endure whatever end approached. But in the depths of his thought, he felt still the old chain, the imprint set upon him long ago when he first bent the knee. His strength had always flowed through that deeper power, and he knew that what he forged for himself had already been claimed. Though he planned as though free, he laboured within another's design. Thus Melkor looked on from beyond the world, and through Mairon laid the first stones of a path by which his malice would enter the world. And though the uttermost west perceived it only dimly, the shadow that was once banished had already taken shape among the children of Iluvatar. I hope you're enjoying this original version of the Dagor Dagorath. As I always say, it was just written by myself, no use of AI or any generative tools at all. And the next part, it will deal with the final sundering of the elves who will be introduced into the story. And I want to thank those of the highest tier on Patreon and YouTube for their continued support as always. Patricia, Lynn, Brandon, Seraphim38, NCV93, Moses Gunn, Master of Dungeons, Wave Sailor and Victus. Thanks again for your support.